Welcome back to Why Does It Feel So Wrong to Be Human at Work, the podcast where we discuss the real, honest, and sometimes messy side of being human at work, whether that be through conversation amongst hosts, guests, or through our series Reacting to Reddit at Work. I'm your executive producer, editor, and officially host of the podcast, Bree Bartos, and I'm very excited for today's conversation because clearly things are a little bit different. But before we hop into that, let's just take a moment. Today, joining me, I have my co-host, Pinaki Kathiari.
Hello, everybody.
And of course, our other co-host here, Chris Lee.
Hey, what up?
Thank you both for joining me today. Like I mentioned, things are a little bit different, and we're definitely going to talk about that. But before we do, I wanted to talk about us at work. And I would love to hear from each of you, and I'll share one too if I think of one. I'll try. I would love to hear from you a standout moment from work that you experienced lately. And this can be either negative or positive.
A standout moment that hits me. Without getting into like too many details, last week I was at a meeting and heard some news about a project, an internal project that hit me the wrong way for a number of different reasons. And there were reasons that the person who was proposing the project wasn't aware of. And I had to, in the moment, like I felt that there was these emotions kind of like coming up for me. Like there was a little bit of panic, a little bit of fear, a little bit of like, oh, they don't know this other side. And so I had to, and I think I came across a little more emotional, and I brought it up there too. I said, listen, you're making the right choices. You're doing the right thing. There's some parts of this proposal that are making me emotional, and I have to acknowledge that. And this is something that's like baggage for me that I have to work through. And so, it's not exactly you. That was last week. This week, I had a follow-up conversation, and I started off the conversation with this person by saying that, hey, regards to the last meeting, I just wanted you to know that there was some baggage that I had to deal with, and I still have to deal with, that's regarding this proposal and this decision, and that it is not a reflection on your choice in the proposal and the decisions that you've made, but perhaps it's something that might inform it. But at the end of the day, I had to acknowledge and, let's say, make sure that this person knew that they're doing a good job, that the decisions are right, and that my feedback wasn't like crushing the idea or totally trying to stop the idea. Does that make sense? And like, I'm curious to know, like, what you think about that, and like, even if that was the right move, this is kind of happening all in like real time as I'm just in conversations. But that's a standout one for me today.
Yeah, I as you're saying that, one of the things that I love about this podcast, and one of the things that we have more room to spend time talking about is our relationship with our own individual emotions, how we react. I liked what you said in real time. And I think the workplace is kind of an interesting place because it's a place where we're trying to be objective and meritorious, and
You gotta look that one up.
And I know objective, but applying merit to how we operate, how we interact with others, and we try to keep our personal emotions at bay, and we just try to do the work the best way we know how. But at the end of the day, the most human thing, the thing that literally makes us who we are as humans and as humanity, is our emotions. Like that's really what makes us and differentiates us as people. And the truth of the matter is, we're constantly emoting about so many things, interactions that we have with colleagues, feedback that we get about different things, emails, things that are said in meetings, things that aren't said in meetings. And I don't know if we play a role in, especially the work that we do, our day jobs. We spend a lot of time looking at the employee experience, internal communications, and we are trying to inspire a specific type of emotion. And generally, it's a very positive emotion. But when I think about what real communication is, it's acknowledging that there might be other emotions going on as well. And, anytime I hear the term toxic positivity, part of what that means to me is that we're pretending like negative
Mm-hmm.
emotions and raw feelings and emotions don't really exist. It's almost like we're trying to suppress it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We're not giving space for people to emote in ways that might bring other people down or those kind of things. And that's tough. For some people, I think going to the workplace can be a very draining and exhausting
Yeah.
experience because you kind of have to be quote unquote on all the time. So, we joke about different episodes like using jargon and lingo and all that kind of stuff. But, ultimately you do have to be on to a degree. And that means, you have to rob yourself of some of these rawer emotions that might not play as well in trying to create a positive culture and atmosphere.
Yeah, and I think that's I guess the point of the story was that I wasn't trying to rob myself of the emotions. Like I had to acknowledge that they happened, and then I had to acknowledge that they happened to this other person because the emotions definitely show up on our sleeves, on our face, and things like that. And if I don't acknowledge it, then this other person is stuck like wondering, man, he seemed angry, or he seemed like he didn't like it. And then they fill in that void with their own story. And so I have to fill that in with what's going on with me really. But I had to then in the moment, like in the meeting, like understand what I'm feeling, understand why I'm feeling what I'm feeling, being able to articulate that feeling back to someone and giving that someone um, a path forward. Like here's here's how you can take this emotion that I'm having without like taking it, internalizing it to them. And it's something that I've been thinking about because we always kind of have to be on, even not at work. Because, right, if I was having this conversation with my son, daughter, cousin, wife, whoever, right, it's the same thing. I have to just like say, hey, I'm feeling this right now. And here's where here's what that means. You know what I mean? So I guess the point is that emotions have a part to play in work and we can't suppress them because if we do, then funny things will happen. So this is, I guess, that story that shows that, yeah, here's how emotions show up in my day-to-day work and whatnot. But yeah, I'm curious to know anything stand out for you, Chris or Bree, if you thought of anything.
I have a story of a colleague of mine that has been going through a series of personal tragedies over the past year or so, and this person, very understandably wanted to keep their private life separate and didn't really want to share any of the details, didn't want to be identified. And all this is, of course, very understandable. And, I think the team did a really great job of showing support for this person. Um, and, for me, one of the things that I think is great about workplaces is there's room and there's space to support one another when we can see that they're having a hard time. But part of the problem is, and I think about this all the time, is all the interactions we have with coworkers, colleagues, clients, vendors. It doesn't really matter who it is. Generally speaking, we're seeing a version of them that's different than how they might actually really internally be feeling or personally be feeling. There's pressure for all of us to show up in a way that feels like it's contributing in a positive way to the culture and to morale, because nobody wants to drag morale down. And it's hard because, this thing that I was talking about earlier, this act and this pressure of being quote unquote on all the time, I think is tough because it's exhausting. It doesn't feel great, even if on the surface your face feels great, your emails end off with "Have a great weekend," and there's a big exclamation point at the end, and all those kind of things. But at the end of the day, I think part of the challenge for us, all of us, individually and personally, is there is that separation between church and state, between our personal lives, our private lives, and our corporate or public personas. And we do it even with, for example, our family. A lot of the times, you don't want to necessarily, show your vulnerability all the time because, uh, especially in the workplace, it can feel like it's counterproductive, or it's these things. Of course, we show up. We're paid to do a job, but at the same time, like a lot of us, if not many of us, are struggling at different times
Mm-hmm.
throughout the day, throughout the year. There's sometimes we're all doing great, and there's other times where we're not doing so great, but there's still that pressure to pretend
Mm-hmm.
that things are going okay, right? And so for those few of us that are blessed to actually be in a really good place most of the time, um, I don't know how different those people show up than the ones that are struggling more of the time. And I think it's one of these dynamics that is always a challenge. And I don't know what the answer
Mm-hmm.
is. And I think it's one of the reasons why I love this podcast is because it gives us a chance to kind of talk about that, even if we don't have the solutions or the answers. But it's helping people recognize that this is the reality of the workplace is
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be dealing with people and you have no idea what they're going through.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this has turned into a standout moment for me because this went better than I could have hoped. Thank you
You,
guys for both
you know,
sharing.
you know what it reminds me of too, like because I think a lot of this kind of like what you're saying, this duality, this dual life we have, like this home and work stuff. I know what I try to do is try to like not have as much of that as possible. Like if we can be more like open, and there are boundaries and stuff like that. There are places where there's a gray area, so we got to be careful of. But yeah, just to like come in and say, like today I am not doing my best. Today, like I'm just feeling really tired, and it would be more. I know I'm not going to bring my all into this conversation, so I apologize about that. Whatever type of thing kind of gives, and it's interesting to say that. And it's also interesting to hear it from somebody else, especially when I'm like, dude, I need you on right now. And you're not on, and that brings anxiety up or whatnot in the other person. And then, so for when I hear things like that, also to acknowledge and understand, it's like getting cut off, right? When you're driving and somebody cuts you off, I have to remind myself that, you know what? There was one day in my entire life that I am sure that I cut somebody off. I didn't mean to do it. Wasn't upset at them, but I know I've done it. So let me give grace to other people who are going through it right now that way. And that's kind of these little things that I think about in my mind to kind of not do that duality.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like another highlight that we had is a few weeks ago, I got to speak with the vice president of communications of a major uh, travel airlines organization. And we were talking about the merger that they were having. And we had a very interesting conversation about two different cultures coming together in one company right now. And I think like most organizations try to force that together to be one culture. Like we're all now one, insert company name here, right? And the approach that this VP had was a little bit different, which I thought was really stand out, where it's more about acknowledging each culture, keeping them separate, and finding ways to little by little move them together, as opposed to, you know, forcing it together. Like it's kind of like, you know, square peg in a round hole type of situation. And I think that's what happens. A lot of times we find ourselves in a culture where we're not exactly comfortable in because of our home life. So like different ways I've been thinking about it, how do you kind of bridge cultures and slowly make it okay for my home culture to be in my work culture and vice versa in healthy ways.
Bree, what are your thoughts on, I think there's something interesting happening with organizations where they're the lines between personal life and work life do start to get blurred a little bit, because you see a lot of organizations wanting to promote great stories about cool things that their employees might be doing, like they're celebrating anniversaries or birthdays, or they just bought a new house, or things like that, and exciting vacations that they've been on. And that starts to creep into, obviously, our personal lives, things that are happening in our personal lives. But at the same time, as we blur those lines, I wonder if there's still, that window where we show up and we're not the best versions of ourselves. And for many different reasons, that could happen. But I don't know if workplaces are really properly set up to acknowledge that side of things as well. So it's one thing to celebrate that, you're starting a new family or something like that, but it's a whole other thing to acknowledge. It's almost like we pretend it didn't happen and we try to move on. And that, for sure, I get it. We want to give people space. We want to give them a chance. But I don't know how easy it is for most employees to have that conversation with their manager, because it's a sign of weakness or vulnerability that could be detrimental to how that manager thinks about you as a contributor to the team.
Yeah. That actually reminds me, and I was just watching this clip yesterday, which is probably why I'm thinking of it. It reminds me of our conversation with Ellen Griley, and when we were talking to her, she mentioned, work-life balance and boundaries and everything, and she said that it can't just be on the employee to set that balance and those boundaries, and that the company has to set the expectation for those boundaries, and the employees can meet them like where they're comfortable. So, yeah, I think like thinking of that, it makes me think like, the company saying like, you are expected, like, I understand that you like to come in a little later and work a little later, right? That's fine. But everyone's expected, you have to be out by 7 p.m. because any later than 7 p.m., like, that's not good for you, like, personally, like, and so like that is an expectation and a boundary like the company sets. And then the employee, like, say their hours are 9 to 5, well, maybe they want to come in 10 to 6. And that's okay. And that's, them setting up what works for their work-life balance. But, they can't go until 9 p.m. because the company said not to, because that would be bad for them long term. Because then if you're at the office till 9 p.m., imagine how you're showing up the next day. Not great.
There's an argument for that too, which makes it a little bit more complicated, because people's brains don't all work at their best at the same time. There are people who work best at midnight.
Yeah.
Great point.
And stuff like that. So it's been interesting kind of even for us, like we have like, there's 9 to 5 and whatnot, more or less to make sure you're there for your folks. But if you want to like leave early and then work midnight, because that's when you do best, have at it, as long as like the team is covered. So it's things like that. I wish we could like communicate things like that a little bit better. I know it happens for me, like in one-on-one conversations. Like we had a I had a talk with somebody about like talking about like money and raises and things like that. And I'm always like, let's talk about it, because it's better to talk about it than to not talk about it. But it's hard, and I have to. That's
It's
something
still
I set.
scary.
It's still scary.
Like, I heard
It's
you
so
say
much.
that. I heard you say that to me on this podcast, and yet I still have nerves.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all I could do is just to kind of like say, hey, in the past it's been, whatever, because I know same thing with other folks. But I think, for local wisdom, it's a little bit different. We're a smaller companies, and I could kind of set this stage as a leader of this company. For other organizations that are bigger, I know it's much more difficult. And I believe that, the way I'm approaching it is not kind of status quo MBA program, you know, stuff. So it puts me in a different kind of like perspective in the mix
Yeah.
too. I think
It's
one thing that's always helped is being on this podcast, because as I say things, I'm like, I refer back to what I said. I'm like, ooh, I gotta practice what I preach, because I can't be not doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I think being on this podcast has made me kind of think about how I can contribute and have an impact on my organization at Gallagher. But you were saying something earlier, Pinaki, about having these conversations about pay, and I think it's an awkward conversation because there's a real tension as it comes to pay. The organization can only dole out so much. But at the same time, the employee needs to put pressure on the organizations if they want to
Mm-hmm.
have good, regular cadence of meaningful increases over time, which they need not only to keep up with the cost of living, but also just for career progression and things like that. And pay is just one of these things that it's a very awkward conversation. Most people, managers, are not well prepared to have that kind of conversation with their employees. And most employees are extremely uncomfortable, trying to quote unquote sell themselves and saying, here's the reasons why I should be paid
Mm-hmm.
this much. But when you think about it, pay is the most, um, critical component of the employer-employee relationship. It's a metric that shows this is how much we value your contributions, and it's also reflective of just what is the market that pays for this and what is the reality of the organization and how much budget we have to disperse, and it's also there's also an inclusion of your personal performance and contributions. And so all these things, all of a sudden, a lot of it has to come to the surface. And I'd say it's probably that one conversation that I think needs to improve in general. Employees are uncomfortable, managers are uncomfortable. So how do we set a better stage for having those important conversations?
Yeah. And that is actually a question that I want to explore in the upcoming season 4. And, that also makes me want to go ahead and ask you two my question for today's episode. Why does it feel so nerve-wracking to change things up?
Oh man, change is hard. You know that. And it's kind of one of those one things, right? Like change is hard. In speaking personally, right? I think I am one who craves change. Like I do need to like change things up. Or I get bored, then I need to change things up. But I have to be careful, because change is hard, and when I change something, it means there's a trickle effect to a whole bunch of other folks. So I have to be careful of that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think change is hard because change, by I guess some kind of like definition, is like the ending of something and the starting of something else. And the ending of something comes with some form of tragedy, especially if you like enjoy it, like it, and got used to it, a pattern or rhythm. Because as humans, we like patterns, we like rhythm, we like knowing what's happening. That shows us a level of safety,
Mm-hmm.
right? That an expectation of what's going to happen at 6 o'clock. We're going to have dinner, whatever, right? And then when we change it up, it dysregulates us, right? We don't know what to expect. And although we know that the world isn't going to be catastrophically wrong, because I don't get dinner at 6 o'clock or whatever, we know like it's one of those things that changes. And we're living in this culture now where it's just like change on top of change on top of change, type of scenario. So all these little things could then like add up. And then
Mm-hmm.
you're like, I don't even know why I'm frustrated. I don't even know what's going on. Like, what's making me feel this way, because it's just like this underlying bunches of change that could be one of those things. But that's my quick rambling answer to that one. What do you got to say about that, Chris? Or you could like add on to
Yeah,
yours?
well, I actually really think that every organization really needs to invest in change management and a real discipline around how to effectively manage, incorporate, and make change like a truly meaningful part of your strategy, because with change comes innovation, right? You can't have innovation without change, without disrupting, without abandoning, the old ways of thinking. On this podcast, we haven't talked at length about the elephant in the room, which is AI. But the truth of the matter is that AI is going to have seismic impacts on the workforce, how workforces are designed, how we think about human contributions to organizations. And that means really thinking through a lot about change management. At Gallagher, we have a really mature change management practice. And I learned so much from a lot of our practitioners in that space about what that process looks like for organizations. But I think, Pinaki, the way I was thinking about this, and Bree, I was thinking about this when you asked the question was, with change, you're introducing risk, because just the nature of change. When, Pinaki, you say that it's the end of something that was comfortable and familiar, and so it's easy to know what the recipe is for success in the old way of doing things yesterday, but this new way of doing things tomorrow, it means you're gonna have to do some uncomfortable things. It may mean that you might make some mistakes, and I think for too long, when I think about the younger generations, a lot of times I don't know if they're put in enough situations where they can be comfortable with failure, where they can be comfortable with losing a game, or failing a mission, or things like that. And I think the most successful people have failed way more often than the least successful people, who probably have never failed. Right? There's a lot of people that just avoid failure. It's like people that are trying to screw up the courage to ask a girl out on a date. Some people, and I would consider myself as one of them, do have a fear of rejection. We do have a fear of hearing no, and I think that gets in the way of innovation, of growth, and ultimately, I think that's where a lot of the fear of change comes from. And so, I think change is. Yeah, I hate to say the cliche. It is the new normal, but I don't know if enough organizations and teams are really creating a meaningful process so that there is a lot more comfort with change and some of the risks that come with it.
The risk is definitely the scariest part for me. And I ask this question because obviously the podcast is going through a big change where I'm going to be hosting the next season. And the
How
risk
do you
of
feel
that
about
is
that change?
the
How do you
risk of
feel
that
about
is
that
people
change?
tune out.
There you go. That's what you're
Right? Like, what if they're like, oh no, turn off?
I got to tell you, Bree, I would be shocked if anyone tuned out, because before we started recording, we were just talking about you bring a couple of things that we haven't really had on this podcast before. So number one is I've always thought you brought such a breath of fresh air to this podcast, because you bring a different level of vulnerability. I think, Pinaki, you and I, we've been vulnerable, but like I felt like it was a bit of a guarded vulnerable. Like we share, but we're not
Oversharers like me.
Yeah. And I think that's really, really key. So I think, so number one, that's a breath of fresh air for sure. Because I think if I think about why does it feel so wrong to be human at work, even more, I think you bring such a great level of humanness to this podcast. And then the other thing too, of course, is, where you're at in your career and within your organization. You bring a really important perspective of, what the majority of America might be facing, which is I have a manager and I need to think about, how do I manage a good relationship with my manager? How do I make sure I'm getting the things done? But more importantly, how do I have that successful interaction and dynamic with my manager so that we're on the same page? But just the nature of manager to employee, it's a really interesting dynamic that I think we should probably spend some more time on a future episode on, which is, we touched on it a little bit when we talked a little bit about Amy Edmondson and her pioneering this idea of psychological safety. But I think the truth of the matter is, despite the desire for psychological safety, for most organizations, it's still tough. And, talking about change, this is a big change that I think organizations have to go to, which is really viewing employer and employee as an actual symbiotic relationship and not like this top down. I think that the difference to me is more accountability, but at the same time, I still think, the employee is trusted with a role and to do things. I think there's a dynamic there that it still feels like it's imbalanced in favor of the employer. Most often it's not equal footing, and which I actually think it really should be. It should be a micro partnership every single time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. It's like, Bree, you bring a different perspective. Like, Chris and Lee are both leaders, are here. We have a different perspective on this. We have both sides of the coin, but the side of the coin that you're able to show are like past versions of us. So you at least give us like a modernized look at like what it is like today. And I think that's what this podcast is about. It's about like looking at it from different angles and real perspectives. So we could kind of like share one side and you could share like another side, which is really cool. Would love to have even more perspectives, because I think that's the reason behind this shift and this change is because why does it feel so wrong to be human at work is bigger than myself and Chris, and even bigger than you. It's all of our voices have a part to play here, because you're right, Chris. It's not like when I'm working with teams, when I'm working with, it's funny. One of the changes that I've made since starting this podcast is I don't say my team or my report or I just say my colleague, my coworker.
Interesting.
Like thing like that. So I do not refer.
One of the things that I remember from starting is like, you told me you don't like to be called boss. Like, I remember that. And so like, I don't call you my boss.
Yeah, exactly. And it changes the dynamic. And basically like when Bree and I like started working together, I said, look, I need you to be able to tell me I'm wrong. I need you to be able to say that I think that's a terrible idea, because they exist in my mind. Right. And it's hard to do if like, if I'm if I'm just looked at as the boss. I've told people this. There are times when like, all right, you could look at me as the boss that's when I have to make a decision. There'll be other times when I'm just a coworker and like, let's just vibe and work together. Yeah. And that's something that has to be done from like a leadership level to kind of set the stage.
And it's something I appreciate because like I am someone like my best relationships are with people that I can like tease and joke with, and like they won't like take it as serious. They'll joke back and they'll tease back. And like you can't always be sarcastic and tease your boss, but thankfully I can, because that's the type of person I am. And then like I could also be like, oh no, sorry, I was being sarcastic. Hopefully like that, came off. But like, I don't have anxiety of being like, oh, I shouldn't have made that joke, because like you took the time to establish that dynamic in that relationship from the start.
Yeah, exactly. And from my perspective too, like as a leader, it was like, does feel pressure of like productivity and things like that. I do understand the other side of that. I was like, oh man, like, that pressure of like, this is a productive time that we have together and we were like joking around. But I then have to remind myself that this type of banter, this type of non-productive time leads to a level of like creativity and innovation that you can't get otherwise. Like Bree had started this like yappy hour thing where we're just kind of getting together and talk with no agendas. But so many interesting things come out of that wouldn't have come out when you just have an agenda.
I wonder too, when we think about different types of managers, I know a lot of organizations promote people into management positions even though they might not necessarily have the natural skills to lead people. They might be more knowledgeable, and I think there's a different way to think about this relationship with managers. I think a lot of managers think that their job is to be the most knowledgeable person in the room, the most knowledgeable about what needs to be done, how to do it. And actually, I don't know if that's the right. Consistently, that's the right way to think about what that role is. I think it's more accountability. There's outcomes that we need to get to as a team, and I remember someone saying that a more effective way to describe who this person is, as opposed to a manager or a boss, is a coach. You've got a team of very, very talented individuals. Phil Jackson would never tell Michael Jordan how to play basketball, but he will tell Michael Jordan how to play basketball in the system that he envisions for this specific team, with all these different talented players on the team and different roles that they have to play. And his job would be to tell Michael Jordan, amongst the other players on the Bulls, this is your specific contribution in terms of the strategy with the players that we've got. Does that work for you? And I think instead of saying, hey, Bree, this is great, but could you do this instead? Could you do this? That micromanaging starts to rob people of an opportunity to have that pride of ownership on their own contributions, as opposed to having a conversation saying, hey, this is great. I was thinking about this. What do you think about this as an idea? And then having that conversation, and then giving the employee a chance to say, well, I'll tell you why I went this direction. It's because of X, Y, and Z. And so if it's defensible, I think good leaders would say, yeah, that makes total sense to me. Then let's keep running with it. Or if the leader brings a different perspective saying, actually, you know what? That's a really good point, but here's the reason why I think it might be better if we go this direction. And we had an experience with this client and this didn't fly, or whatever it is. But having real conversations instead of the default go-to, because time is money and we need to be productive. And it's just faster if I just say, just do it this way. And I think that's where cultures start to break down, because then you start, at the employee level, people start to feel less engaged because now it's not mine. I think we might have talked about this in a previous episode, but once you create something as an employee and you send it to your boss, and then they make changes, and then they send it to their boss's boss, and then they make changes. And by the time it's sort of fully cooked, it doesn't resemble anything that you brought your own thinking to. It's now just, I became somebody that just was ushering this conversation, and someone else basically created it. And I don't feel pride of ownership. This is not mine anymore. And it's not to say that it's a personal thing that you've created. If there's merit to these different changes, that's one thing. But so often it's not, especially in the work that we do in internal communications. A lot of times people will bring their own personal opinions and thoughts to things that aren't necessarily grounded in insights to push things forward. And so that's where I think a lot of managers forget what their actual job is. And maybe it's a way to think about it is more as a coach. I'm here to lead this team with a common strategy, tell people what their specific roles are, but I don't need to micromanage unless there's someone that, welcomes that and could really use that support. But in general, that shouldn't just be the default. It should be more in specific circumstances. What are your thoughts on that? It's just kind of the way I think about it, but.
Yeah, I love the coaching idea. Similar, I kind of think of myself in that way, and I'll add do it my way, your way. There is something I say too. I often say, you did it this way. I really think that it should be this way, but I'm comfortable with you going your way, because you never know. Like I've had instances where I thought that my way was going to be the better approach, but it wasn't. And that was proven to me. So then I have to kind of think that, like, you know what? It's not always like this same way, and it doesn't have to always be my way. And how do I know if my way is always, how do I know if there's no better way if I don't try another way, to kind of pass that fear of change and try something new just to see what happens? Right? Because innovation is also experimentation.
Yeah.
I love that.
And, since I have started working on the podcast and everything, we have not shied away from experimenting. And I love that because it takes the pressure off. Like, we could really do whatever we want with this podcast. That's kind of what we're doing. I do want to talk a little bit about season 4 before we wrap up, because we are almost out of time. But season 4 isn't going to be too much different than season 3 / between the seasons has been. We'll still have the 2 formats that we alternate through: a more topic-based conversation and then a reacting to Reddit at work. But the big thing with season 4 is that I have questions. And I'm looking for answers. Okay. So I got a lot of questions about the workplace. Why are things the way they are? Why do we feel the way we
Love
feel
it.
or think the way we think? So next season, Bree has questions, and a lot of them are going to be in the why does it feel so wrong, or maybe so good, or sneaky, or whatever it may be. And I'm going to be inviting on guests that might have answers for me. So, for example, I'm very excited to tease Why Does It Feel So Wrong to post about yourself online, which will be about employee generated content, social media, being a thought leader. And I'm very excited about the guests that we have on. We'll have Yanni Papas from Workshop. He is a LinkedIn influencer himself. And then also Sarah Whittle, who is a consultant and has her own social media consultancy right now, but she used to work for Smosh, the YouTube channel, Crocs, and Duolingo. So 2 experts in social media that I'm very, very excited to talk about next season. So you'll definitely not want to miss that. And we're also going to keep going with reacting to Reddit at work. Selfishly, these are my favorite. I love them. I love
Me
bringing
too.
I love the outlandish stories that we can find, but most importantly, like, there's just nothing more human to me than, going to Reddit and asking for help and asking for advice. A lot of people, like, the reason I wanted to start doing this in the first place is, like, people are going to Reddit because they don't have anyone in their real life to turn to. And so if we could provide them with answers or help in some way, I'd love to. And then also, they're probably not alone, and other listeners maybe are dealing with a similar situation. I know that I personally love Reddit podcasts because I've learned a lot on how to, like, handle situations in an emotionally mature way, because those aren't things you learn usually. Like, not everyone learns those as a child. So I love listening to podcasts with advice and conversations. So those will be continuing. And of course, Pinaki and Chris will be joining as they can and as much as they would like. But I'm very, very excited to share that a familiar face will be joining me for reacting to Reddit at work. Lottie Baisley will be joining me to react pretty regularly to some Reddit stories, whether that be with Pinaki and Chris or just me and her sharing stories back and forth. I never get the chance to be surprised. And Lottie has the energy of bringing some good stories to me that maybe I haven't seen. And so I'm very excited that you guys will actually get to experience me reacting. And I will get to hear some things for the first time. But yeah, it's going to be really exciting. It's going to be great. It's just about talking about being humans at work with some familiar humans and some new ones. And we also now have our own Reddit. So hopefully people will start writing into our subreddit and sharing stories and situations or ideas or questions they have that we can dive into. So that's a little bit about season 4, and it'll be coming in September. So that means we're going to go on a break. And I'm so sorry to our listeners, but it won't be too long. Obviously, you're listening to this episode right now as we wrap up between the seasons, but we have one more episode that we are going to release before season 4 comes out. And this was kind of a test run of me having a question. And Pinaki, Chris, I'm so sorry you guys were not invited, but that is because it was about why does it feel so wrong to be a woman at work? And that, it didn't really.
I can't think of a less appropriate thing for Pinaki and I to weigh in on, just because, for obvious reasons, right? But I yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to listening to that episode because I think it's an important episode, and it's something that it's another huge gift that you bring to the dynamic of our podcast.
Yeah, so we did record that, and I will be sharing it ahead of time because, since I've recorded it, I've wanted to formalize the format and the segment a little bit more. But also, our guests, two wonderful ladies joined me. Jen Samuel, who you might recognize from her episodes of Between the Seasons. She is employee here at Local Wisdom, and then also Regine Nelson, another excellent woman in the space, and she just moved to Spain, and so we had to get her on the schedule before she moved. So that's why that one is ready to go a little early. And then again, I like a teaser episode. I want to tease what you guys can expect in season 4. But yeah, so this episode, one more, and then we'll be back in September. And hopefully you guys will tune right back in and are excited, because I'm excited.
I'm excited. Thank you so much, Bree, for concepting this. I loved our conversations about it. I felt like this was a great mashup between our first 2 seasons and the between the seasons to create this season 4. So that's going to be great, and I'm excited. So stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. It is very exciting. And like I said, Chris and Pinaki will still be joining, and we'll be hopefully meeting some new faces. I'm very, very excited to explore new topics, keep asking questions, and keep reacting to Reddit because, again, those are my favorite. Thank you guys for joining me today for this episode. It was great talking to you both, like always. Be sure to check out the links in bios to connect with me, Pinaki, and Chris on LinkedIn. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and please share with your friends the podcast. It helps us out a lot, and we greatly appreciate it. We'll see you next week for another episode of Why Does It Feel So Wrong to Be Human at Work, the podcast about the real, honest, and sometimes messy side of being human at work.
Tune in, everybody. And you'll catch Chris, myself, Bree in there. I'm still looking forward to bringing in some of that history and research and things like that into the conversation, because we want to look at it from all perspectives. This is the human experience at work. There is no right or wrong. There is just us.